pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could all remain standing for a moment of silence. I'd ask the clerk to call the roll.
Alderman Craig? Present. Alderman Ledway? Alderman Long?
Here.
Alderman Roy?
Present.
Alderman Osborne? Alderman Corriveau?
Here.
Alderman O'Neill?
Here.
Alderman Lavasser?
Here.
Alderman Shea?
Here.
Alderman Katz-Antonis? Alderman Shaw? Here. Alderman Griazzo?
Here.
Alderman Gamache?
Here.
Alderman Arnold?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Presentation by the New Hampshire DOT regarding the I-293 exit 6 and 7 project. I will, Alderman O'Neill, if you would pick up on the chair of this. I've got to go to the school board and preside over a meeting there for the superintendent search. So good luck, everybody. Make sure they don't come in with a little project. We want the whole thing done. Thanks.
Good luck, Your Honor, there, and I know you've spoken with Mr. Cota before and that, so thank you, Your Honor. With that, I'll introduce Keith Cota, who's the project manager from New Hampshire DOT for Exit 6 and 7, among many projects. We've seen him on TV with the Memorial Bridge, and there's probably a few more, Keith, along the way. So, Keith, why don't you take over tonight's presentation?
Thank you very much. We certainly want to acknowledge, I really appreciate having the opportunity to come down and give you an update on one very important project for the city, but I also have a little bit of an update on Exit 4 if we have some extra time. But they're two very critical projects for the city. As Alderman O'Neill said, I certainly have put my feet around the state. So a little bit of a project over in Portsmouth, with a bridge project over there in Newington, Dover, but it's always great to work closer to Concord. What we have this evening is basically an overview of the Exit 6 and 7 project. I have with me Mike Dugas. He's our chief of preliminary design from our Bureau of Highway Design. With him, right next to him, is Bill Cass. He's the director of project development. So if you have any tough questions, I'll let Bill answer those. We also have our consultant from VHB, Marty Kennedy, and I'm going to be passing the mic on to Marty to give an overview of the Exit 6 and 7, and then hopefully we can answer any questions that you have, or at least understand, give you a good understanding as to where we are going and what time schedule that we're looking at. With that in hand, I'd like to turn it over to Marty.
Thanks, Keith. As Keith said, my name is Marty Kennedy. I'm with Vanessa Hagen-Bruslin. The study team actually includes Vanessa Hagen-Bruslin. We're the lead on the study team, but we're also working with the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, who's preparing the traffic model for the team, and also RKG Associates is on our team. Let me just quickly review the overall study purpose. This is a planning study, and the purpose of the planning study is to consider transportation system modifications aimed at addressing capacity and safety-related deficiencies along the main line and at the interchanges of Exit 6 and 7 from approximately a 3-mile segment of I-293, including consideration of relocating and reconfiguring Exit 7 into a fully directional interchange. Okay. I don't know. Is my mic not on?
Yeah, you got to talk right into them.
Okay. Is that better, or can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just quickly touch on the study corridor. I think you all know that the study corridor that we're looking at starts just to the north of the Granite Street interchange and extends up through Exit 6 in this area. This is the existing Exit 7, Front Street, the landfill, and up in this area just to the north of the landfill is the area where we're looking at potentially relocating Exit 7. We do have a technical advisory committee that's been put together, and it's made up of members of the DOT, Federal Highway, the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, as well as representatives of City of Manchester, Town of Goffstown, Town of Hooksett, the Chambers from Chamber of Commerce from Manchester and Hooksett, the Manchester Community College, and also State Senator David Booton is also serving on that committee. Just so you know, we do have a project website, 293planningstudy.com. You can go onto that website and get any of the material that we presented in the meetings, meeting minutes and so forth, schedules, upcoming meetings, that type of information. Let me, before I go over the concepts, just give you a sense of the overall schedule. We've broken out the overall project into 4 phases. We started in the spring of last year. So in our first phase 1 was our data collection effort. That extended from the spring and into the summer of last year. That's when we went out and collected our traffic volume counts. We prepared the traffic model. We developed our environmental resource mapping, prepared all of that, and we had some initial meetings. Into the fall of last year, we stepped into the second phase, which we called our brainstorming phase, and it was there based on the information we heard from public meetings and from input on the website that we developed what we thought were potential solutions. We had a meeting here in December, a public meeting, where it was at the end of the phase 2, where we presented those initial ideas. And then we moved into phase 3, and that's the phase that we're in right now. We're coming to close to the end of phase 3, where phase 3 is where we're developing, evaluating, and screening those alternatives. So we're better defining those alternatives. And when I wrap up, I'm going to go through the concepts, but when I finish, I'm going to come back to the schedule and talk to you about where we go from here. But ultimately, this planning study is going to be complete this summer. So once we get through phase 3, we're going to move into the final phase, which is the documentation, getting all the plans and reports put together. We're going to be done in the summer of this year. So let me just step through. First, we do have, we've had a series of meetings, as I said. We've had public meetings, we've had advisory committee meetings, we've had some briefings with the town of Hooksett. We had a briefing with the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. We're before you here tonight. The idea is just to try to, as best we can, keep the communities and the public up to speed on where we are on the project. So we're continuing to do that. At one of the earlier public meetings, we had an informal public workshop, and we asked people to come into the meeting and to talk to us informally about what the problems were, what some of the issues and constraints, and also at that time some potential solutions. This is not a complete list, but some of the major problems, issues that were raised either through that public meeting or we had input through the website included poor sight lines along the highway, queuing along the highway, queuing onto the highway from the ramps, in the high-speed weaving, short on-ramps and limited acceleration length as you enter the highway, vehicular crashes, the confusion and congestion up on the Amoskeag Circle, highway noise, truck access to Goffstown and from between Goffstown and into the highway, congestion, safety issues at the college driveway over at Front Street, as well as the idea that the existing Exit 7 only has access to and from the south, and it doesn't have full directional access. So again, there's a lot more, but those are the major issues that were being raised. So with this, let me get into the various alternatives. I'm going to step through, and back in December, we tossed on it, we described a number of different types of potential concepts, and they're starting to look a little bit more like real design plans as opposed to the sketches we had in December. However, I do want to make this point that this is still a planning study, and even though some of these plans do look like more engineered plans, the reality is, because it's a planning study, we still don't have a good sense, and it's too early to know exactly about property impacts. But we do need to show the plan on an aerial, which means that, there's obviously going to be a question, what's the impact on that property? But I just want to remind you that it's still a planning study. We're well away from deciding this is absolutely going to take one property or another. With that said, we're going to start with Exit 6. And this is an aerial photo of Exit 6. North is to the right on 293. And the issues that were raised here was pretty much the idea of the, the weaving and the congestion problems up on the circle. This is where traffic today backs down the northbound ramp and actually onto the highway. In the southbound, and actually in the northbound on-ramp, although this ramp is relatively long, there's very little acceleration length here, so once you're out, you're right into the main line. In the southbound direction, you have a heavy volume entering the ramp at that point and a heavy volume exiting at that point. So there's a very tight weave section in there that's problematic. And also you have this small slip ramp, southbound slip ramp from Eddy Road that also has very little acceleration distance as you're entering the highway. And so we started looking at various alternatives, and we're down now to 4 primary alternatives for exit 6. And let me just step through them for you. The first one we're looking at is a single-point urban interchange. This is very similar to the layout you have at Granite Street, single point, meaning, and the single point would be located here at Amhersteg. Each of the ramps would come into a single intersection. The difference between what we're showing here is that the single point would actually be above the highway as opposed to Granite Street where the single point is below. So 293 would pass underneath and these ramps would come up to a single intersection here with a traffic signal. Now, because of the Front Street, Eddy Road, and this is where the existing signalized intersection is at Front Street and Eddy Road, that is too close to be able to have a full intersection right here. And so what this concept does is looks at bringing Goffstown Road up and over into the single point, and Front Street passes underneath and comes down to an intersection somewhere in this area where there would be another structure that would cross over 293 and come into a signalized intersection at this point. What that would allow is all the ramp movements happening at the single point here, but connections to Front Street and Eddy Road could occur through this signalized intersection to go either into the city or go to Goffstown Road or go to the highway at the interchange. Now, you'll notice that on this, I said that today there's this existing short southbound ramp. Under this concept, what we're proposing is that this be maintained. Actually, it'd be reconstructed and provided sufficient acceleration distance and so forth. The reason for that under this concept is that the volume of traffic that today comes up Eddy Road and gets on at this point would now, under the single point option, would need to come up, take a right-hand turn at this signal, come to this signal, take a left-hand turn, come to a third signal at the single point and get on the ramp and down in that direction. That's a little out of the way, and also the fear would be if we did that, a lot of traffic that comes up today from Eddy Road would stay on the local streets and try to head back south to Granite Street, and I think there'd be a little too much impact on the local streets. So we think under this condition, if this is the plan that goes forward, we could provide for that movement, which would allow that traffic to get on onto the highway. Now, the main line, 293, is proposed to be in the future 3 lanes in each direction. That's an additional through lane in each direction. Now, at the exit 6 interchange, coming southbound into the interchange, what we're proposing is that there'd be 3 lanes coming down into the interchange, but with the relatively heavy volume that gets off at that ramp and a heavy volume that gets on at that ramp, what we can do is actually drop a lane from 3 to 2 right in this area within the interchange. And what that does is that allows this on-ramp to enter the highway without merging. It has its own lane, so it would be able to accommodate that traffic entering the highway. Now, this smaller on-ramp from Eddy Road would be a merge movement that would enter that 3rd lane. But to be able to drop that lane from 3 down to 2 and then allow this ramp to come on into its own lane will substantially improve the overall operations of the ramps and the configuration in general. Before I leave this configuration, I just want to give you a sense. We're, as I said, we're planning study, way too early to talk about, property impacts, but what we're trying to do here is to minimize impacts to properties. And so let me just, if you could point out a few things. Within this concept here, this is the existing ramp. You can see that gray area right in there. That's the existing ramp. This is the hotel that's located here. We're actually showing that we can actually provide greater distance between the road and the hotel under this concept than that's out there today. So we're not actually pushing into that area. Also, if you come over to this side, we were, when we first started, we were concerned about the properties on this side. Well, that gray area right there, that's the existing circle. And so we're over here now. And so we're actually staying away from the properties here, which again is trying to minimize those impacts. Again, you can look at this gray area right underneath our ramp. That's the existing on-ramp right there. And we're further to the west than that. So again, we've got a residential area in here. We're trying to minimize those impacts. And so at least at this point, with this concept, we're able to show substantial improvement, but at the same time trying to minimize impacts. There would be impacts to properties over in this area in here, but again, it looks as though all the properties in this area we're being able to at least keep to a very minimal. Now we have 3 other types of options for exit 6, and the other 3 are all very similar. The 3 of them are diamond configurations, and I'll just step through those. The diamond configurations look something like this. So as opposed to the single point, which was located over here, now we have a diamond configuration where we have the off-ramp, an on-ramp, the southbound on-ramp, and the southbound off-ramp and the southbound on-ramp here with 2 signalized intersections at a typical diamond-type intersection. We would have Front Street entering Goffstown Road, Amherstburg Bridge at a T intersection. You would not be able to travel through, but you would be able to come in, enter, and come down to the signal at this point. And again, this is the existing signal at Fletcher Street. The issue with this particular layout with the diamond over here, as opposed to what the single point did, is that the volume of traffic, you'll see that all the traffic that's either coming from Goffstown Road, coming from the city, from Amherstburg Bridge, and that's off from Front Street, all has to go through this area right in here. This intersection is pulling a lot of traffic through that point. And I'll tell you at this point, we're not finished all our analysis, but the operational analysis we're doing says it's very challenging to make that work. And so just keep in mind the difference between the single point was that we had the movements from the, let me step back, all the movements from the interchange were happening here, and we were able to split the traffic from Front Street away from those movements, where when we have the diamond configuration, all of the traffic is going through this point. We're looking at 2 other configurations here, very similar layout, diamond interchange configurations. This is a standard diamond interchange. We're also looking at what's called a diverging diamond interchange. It's a little different, it's a little unconventional. There aren't a lot of these around, but basically the way this operates is these signals are a simple 2-phase operation. With the segment between the 2 signals, traffic actually travels on the opposite side of the bridge. And if you're interested, at the end of the meeting, I actually have a short video I can show you how these operate. I don't know if you want to see that or not, but it's a little bit different configuration. We're also looking at the same general layout, a diamond configuration, but with roundabout control. And I'll tell you again, we're not complete all our evaluation, but what I've seen so far, the operational analysis for the roundabouts, these are 2-lane roundabouts, they don't work very well. And so, again, I don't want to prejudge any of this, but I don't expect that we'll be carrying that one forward. Anyway, so those are the 4 major alternatives that we're looking at for exit 6. And again, whether it's the diamond or the single point, again, the properties over here, we are able to stay away from those properties and minimize those. Let me step up to exit 7 and talk a little bit.
Marty, do you want to take questions on exit 6, or
However
the
you
board
want
want to ask questions on exit 6, or let him present exit 7 as well? Let him keep going? Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
All right. Let's step up to exit 7. At exit 7, this is the existing exit 7 at Front Street. Now, we're looking at potentially relocating this interchange further to the north, but also as part of this evaluation, what we need to look at as an alternative is, can we also be able to get the same benefit of relocating and doing it in this location? So we're looking at, one of the alternatives is to upgrade or reconstruct the interchange at that existing location. And we have a configuration that would show, if you did this, again, 3 lanes in each direction on 293, create a diamond interchange, reconfigure the ramps. Today, you can see the northbound ramp that comes in at this point. You'd bring it in more at 90 degrees. And in addition, what you would do is you would have northbound ramps which are not there today. Now, I'll tell you that one of the, when we started looking at the options for relocating the interchange further to the north, one of the aspects of that configuration is it provides connection to the west, to Dunbarton Road. And so when we looked at this, we said, well, to be fair and to be comparing apples to apples, maybe what we need to do is consider an alternative here that also provides that connection to Dunbarton Road. And we've been looking at that. And what I'll tell you is that from a geometric standpoint, or could you build this connection, the grades are such that you could do that. It's constructible. However, as we continue to look at how it would operate, although it would have the benefit of providing a connection to Dunbarton Road, there's still a significant amount of traffic that travels along Front Street. And now that we're taking a closer look at that, you know, what we'd be doing is pulling traffic from Front Street, bringing it up to Dunbarton Road, taking a left to come down, to take a right back onto Front Street. Don't know that that makes a lot of sense. But again, I just, you know, no final decisions have been made on this, but I just want to show you we're looking at that potential alternative. One key element of upgrading the existing exit 7 location, and one of the potential problems with maintaining the existing location, is the spacing between the existing 7 and the new reconstructed exit 6. This is the single point exit 6, and this would be if we reconstructed exit 7 in its current location. That point between the Gore area coming off of the on-ramp here and that point is only about 1,600 feet. It's fairly close. You generally don't want to build interchanges that close. However, it can operate. What we showed, if it was just a 3-lane main line and you had your diverge movement, the vehicles exiting at this point under our 20-year design condition, that would actually fail. There would be more volume that could be handled at that point. However, if you are to put in a short distance of essentially a 4th lane in through this section to create a weaving lane between the 2 ramps, you can actually get it to operate acceptably. Again, it's a question of it's close, it's a weaving condition, doesn't mean it's perfect, but there is a way to make it operate acceptably if this becomes one of the options that you want to take seriously and move forward. Yes?
Would that be comparable in length, excuse me, would that be comparable in length to the one on South Willow where you get off when you're coming from South Willow Street and you get on westbound, and then you can get off exit 2, which is Brown Avenue. There's a narrow strip that you can stay way over to the right. Would that be comparable in length to that?
That extra lane is what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Gives you room to do a little weaving, yes. Anyway, so I just want to let you know, and by the way, if with that a little additional widening in here to provide that, obviously has a little bit more impacts to properties on both sides of the road. So again, that's a potential downside to this. Let me move up further to the further to the north, and this is the area where, this is the landfill, this is Front Street, that's the existing interchange right in here. We'd be looking to construct an interchange up in this area somewhere. So what we've done is we've laid out a potential interchange up in this area. What we'd have is an off-ramp, an on-ramp. We would have an off-ramp here, and because of the landfill here, there's really not room to get an on-ramp here, so you'd have a little loop ramp, but you'd have all the movements at this location. We would provide connection down to Front Street, signalized intersection down at Front Street, and we'd need to provide connections to the college as well as to Country Club Drive and the residential units in that area. So we've looked at how you could do that and how you could provide those connections. There's a residential complex down here, and how you could provide connections to this new roadway. We'd also provide connection to the west to Dunbarton Road. I should also say that we actually have two options, or within this alternative, of where to connect to Front Street. This is one of them, and we're looking at another option, bringing it this way, and it looks like that. And so instead of the intersection here, it's over on this side. If it's here, again, we still need to be able to provide connections to the college and to the residential areas on this side. But we're still, this is, at this point, it looks like, this is feasible. The grades are actually very challenging in this area, but this is looking like it's going to be feasible. Note that this area right in here on this side of the landfill, the grades are actually substantial in that area. And I want to talk a little bit about, back a number of years ago, there was a previous alignment that looked at a new interchange in this location, and it kind of hugged the landfill in this area, intersecting Dunbarton Road, and one of the reasons for that was to continue this connector road up to Goffstown Road. The town of Goffstown would very much like to have a connection here so that they can have connection to their industrial area to the interchange. That would involve the crossing of the Black Brook right in this area, and again, there's some relatively substantial environmental issues of the crossing of the brook in this area. The reason I point this out is, if you notice on our concept, we've pushed the road to this side, and the reason for that is that if you hug the landfill, the grades are much more substantial, which would increase the cost, and the cuts that would be needed to put that road in would be substantial. And so we're over here, and I'll show you the general alignment is that we're over at this point here. And then now we're trying to look at, well, depending on where we come in to Dunbarton Road, whether this happens sooner or later, we still need to make sure that it all fits together. And so, I suspect that as the project moves forward, we're going to be looking at, once we get beyond the planning study, get into the environmental assessment process, we'll probably be looking a little more detail about, although the grade alignment works best here, but if this is going to happen, it may make sense to bring this a little bit more to this area. So those decisions still need to be made. And for that matter, the question of depending, if this connection is there, whether this is the main line, the heavy traffic does that, as opposed to this being the heavy traffic, meaning this tees into this, or should this roadway tee into Dunbarton Road? Those decisions still need to be made.
Marty, before you come off the slide, Norfolk, could you just reference where Goffstown Road is and Dunbarton Road, I think?
Yeah, actually, Goffstown Road comes in here and heads down here to exit 6. This is Straw Road up in here, and Dunbarton Road runs down through here.
Thank you.
Okay. And so I think, let me see, I think that's it for the concept. So before I wrap up, I just wanted to let you know what's coming up next, because we're at the point where as I said, we're in phase 3. We're right at the end of this developing, evaluating, and screening these alternatives. On April 10th, we're going to be meeting with the advisory committee again, and that meeting is going to be about going over the The results of the evaluation, we have this impact matrix that's going to look at, where are the impacts to wetlands or properties and other things. When we come out of that meeting, we're hoping to be able to package this all, so to be able to come to a public meeting perhaps sometime in May, where we would present the results of the evaluation, all the concepts, and then get kind of final sign-off from yourselves as well as the public. And if that goes well, then we go into documentation, get the reports done by the summer, and we'd have the planning study done. So, Keith, do you want to add a few things?
Yes, if I may. Thank you, Marty. As Marty indicated, we're well along in trying to develop what we classify as reasonable alternatives. The purpose of this planning study is not to come out with one alternative. It's basically to identify what are the reasonable approaches to address the capacity and safety issues that we're seeing along the Exit 6 and Exit 7 corridor. We still have a long ways to go, even after we come out of this planning phase study. But as Marty indicated, it is our intent to continue with the public dialogue, the public input on the alternatives. We do know that from our partners in Goffstown, they certainly have an interest in Exit 7 for transportation aspects to their communities. So there's a lot up in the air right now. Public feedback is basically what we're looking for. What we are basically seeing right now is eventually this corridor analysis is going to identify reasonable approaches. And it's going to identify what we begin to identify is the purpose and need for the project. These are very critical elements in the next phase of the project. The next phase basically takes us through the NEPA process, our National Environmental Protection Act process, where we actually take the reasonable range of alternatives, the purpose and need, and start very detailed dialogue with our resource agencies, the federal and cultural, federal agencies for the EPA and Fish and Wildlife, and also the cultural aspects with the State Historic Preservation offices, and start dialoguing very carefully as to the narrowing down the reasonable range of alternatives to get down to the least damaging practical alternative. That phase will come in after this documentation is completed. The department has, through the capital program, Turnpike Capital Program, has the funding for this corridor analysis. That's all the funding that we currently have available to carry this project. What is coming out of this with the documentation is going to give us the document, going to give us the support to go back to our legislative leaders, as well as the Governor and Executive Council, and seek additional appropriations through our capital program. Our Turnpike program has a lot of needs. We anticipate probably in the order of another $460 million of capital needs for the Turnpike. Part of that $460 million is this improvement here. Department, certainly through the Commissioner's office as well as our Turnpike Administrator, fully supports the moving this project forward. But once we complete this documentation, and the next phase will be to go to the Governor and Executive Councilors, as well as the leadership at the legislature, and seek additional funds in order to capital program funds in order to carry this project forward. So we certainly hope that you will support us on that avenue when we get to that point, but we are nearing that point very quickly here. So with that, if you have any questions, we certainly will try to address or answer questions you have.
Yeah, we'll go, before, I don't know if he was recognized, but Bill Cass is here, the Director of Project Development, and an old friend to many of us here. So with that, and if you can, just point out if your questions for Mr. Coder or Mr. Kennedy. Alderman Griazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was actually curious about the update on Exit 4 before we got too deep into questions. If that's a quick presentation, if they can give that real quick.
If you'd like the overview of Exit 4, we can do that.
Thank you.
As I noted earlier, there's two very important projects along I-293 corridor within the boundaries of the city here. Exit 4 project basically is, the purpose of Exit 4 was basically to take a look at the 5 red list bridges we have along that very 0.8 of a mile corridor. We have the bridge that's a northbound ramp, off-ramp bridge over I-293. We have the mainline bridge that's over the northbound on-ramp, the northbound on-ramp over the south channel of the Piscataqua River, as well as the mainline bridge and for both the mainline bridges over the river channel. Those bridges basically are reaching the point where they're functionally obsolete, and structurally we have to address them. That's basically the primary reason why they're on the red list. Yeah, this is the location of the bridges themselves. This is the ramp bridge up over the turnpike, the I-293 bridge over the northbound on-ramp, the ramp bridge across the river, accessing up toward Exit 5, and then we have the 2 river bridges, which spans both the northbound and southbound barrel. We held a public hearing in September 2011. We had a special committee layout, was approved in November 2012. We are right now looking to advertise this project in July 23rd of 2014. Excuse me, that should be 13. It's this summer. Now, we expect that the completion of this will be in the fall of 2016. The project is funded through our Turnpike Capital Program, and it is about $33 million in total construction costs. Some of the aspects that's coming out of this, basically what we're looking at is a southbound direction. We are looking at carrying 3 lanes past the weave of the on-ramp, as well as the off-ramp right in this location in here. That 3rd lane is actually going to give further relief to that short weave section in there. And then we're also widening the shoulders through this area. We are also building a sound wall to protect this neighborhood here, plus another sound wall to the south that will protect the Wentworth Street neighborhood. We're adding several water quality basins in the project. That's basically going to address some of the pollutant loading to the river system itself. And of course, as I noted, we're improving the weave condition as well as providing additional shoulder widths along this corridor. The construction of this is very tight area. It's one of those projects where you design the project sometimes around the traffic control. And that's basically what we had to do here. We have a 3-phase construction set up for this project. The first phase is basically the westerly widening, basically taking all the new bridge widenings to the westerly side, creating enough width on the westerly side to allow 2 lanes of traffic to be carried over, basically taking the southbound traffic that we have today, moving it over onto the new structures that get built on the westerly side. So all the ramp construction along the Exit 4 side has to be completed during that phase. And we are looking at a short closure of the southbound on-ramp for about 3 weeks as we reconstruct that portion of the ramp. We think it's going to take less than 3 weeks, but there will be about a 3-week period where we'll be looking to redirect traffic to the turnpike system through alternative means, whether it's down to 101 or up to Granite Street to interchange itself. Phase 2, we start coming in, once we move traffic over onto the westerly side, we take the southbound barrel where traffic is today, rebuild that section. And that will be certainly the tightest section. It will take about a full construction season in order to complete that. And then once that middle section is completed, we'll be basically moving the northbound traffic over onto that middle section and then start rebuilding the easterly side of the corridor. That's where we run into some difficulties from a traffic management sense. Again, it's going to be a whole construction season in order to build that easterly side, but we will have about a 9-month closure of the northbound on-ramp, that ramp that comes into the weave to Granite Street, and I'll kind of explain why. The closure itself, with this situation, basically we're coming in, we have to rebuild the 2 river bridges. This river bridge is connected with a ramp. We also have to rebuild the on-ramp bridge over the Piscataqua River. So while we're building this, these ramp bridges in here, we really can't put traffic on it. And so we really have no other means of other than looking at closing this ramp for that period while it's being constructed. Certainly, we're going to put precautions in the contract that looks to accelerate the construction as fast as it can be done. But we also are looking at other avenues as for traffic mitigation. We're looking at smart work zones. We're going to have basically traffic cameras out there monitoring the traffic flow, whether it's along 2nd Street as well as the Turnpike. We're going to have dynamic message board signs out there that will basically broadcast messages as to whether delays in getting through the corridor. We'll be looking at signage package further down toward Bedford side, as well as further up on the Turnpike side to redirect traffic and alert them as to the change in traffic patterns. We will also have very strong construction sign packages for the corridor. We'll also be modifying and monitoring the signal timing at the 2nd Street and Granite Street as we look at the traffic pattern change that will be occurring. As well as coordinating with emergency responders and city public works. So we'll be working very closely on those angles. But there will be a period during that 2016 construction season where that ramp access is going to change. The impacts to the city, besides the traffic flow through this area, considering the size of this project, we were quite surprised at the minimal impacts that we're seeing right now. We have the sewer pump station. We have some temporary construction easements along the highway side of that. We got some plans through the Public Works relative to the building itself and the actual construction of that site. Very impressive construction pictures. So we were able to basically minimize and actually stay away from critical components of that plant. So it'll still continue to be in operation. The water line, there's a water line that runs under this bridge right in here that crosses. We do have a short segment in there that has to get relocated, but that is being relocated under a force account agreement with the city. They be paid by the project. We also have 3 sewer service line connections right down in this segment right in here, these 3 properties right in here. Those we're actually splitting the cost with the city, 1/3 of it being reimbursed to the city for that cost. It's a very small cost, but it is a minor impact. So let me give you a quick overview of the exit 4, but it is coming. Like I said, we're advertising the project this July. We expect that in September, October, we'll be looking for Governor and Executive Council approval of the contract. I would not expect much is going to happen this winter because of the season itself, but you may see some start of the work on the westerly side section. Again, the biggest impact is going to be that last 3rd phase of our construction along that area. So, okay.
Alderman Graza, you all set on exit?
I'm all set. Thank you for the
exit 4.
indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions on exit 4? So we can come off that and then go back and concentrate on exits 6 and 7. We're okay on 4. Thank you, Keith, for that update.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll go back to exits 6 and 7. Say that fast. Alderman Arnold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple comments I want to make on it. Keith, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the work that you and your entire team have been doing for, seems like forever, but I know it's just been a few months. Some of the issues you cited in your presentation, specifically dealing with traffic congestion and the public safety hazards of the Amoskeag Rotary, are things that a lot of us have been talking about for a long time. I've said this before, I'll say it again, anyone whose commute takes them through the Amoskeag Rotary ever, certainly thinks that either some major traffic mitigation measures need to be enacted there or that a redesign is appropriate. So I'm glad to finally see this moving forward. I know that we're just still in the study phase, but I want to thank my colleagues who have participated at various junctures. I know Chairman O'Neill and the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission has been very active in that conversation, and Alderman Long as well. and other members of the Manchester State Rep delegation for their efforts in trying to make this a priority in the capital budget. So hopefully we continue with those efforts, and hopefully we see some changes that are badly needed in that part of the city. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Alderman Shaw, did you have some?
Yes, I did. As a legislator, my other role, you mentioned that you were going to have to go to the legislature at some point for funding. Will you have any federal funding for this 6 and 7 at all?
There is, well, the future funding is still in for discussion. One of the directions that the department has taken with this project, with the corridor analysis, we asked Federal Highway Administration to be our lead federal agency. The impetus behind that is that it allows the Federal Highway Administration to overview and be our partner in reviewing the NEPA document, the National Environmental Protection Environmental Documentation, so that should we have the opportunity to apply for federal funds or federal grants come forward, then the NEPA process would have been completed in accordance to their requirements, and therefore it would make it easier to obtain federal funds. At this point, I cannot tell you what the distribution of funds would be. I know from an aspects of our Turnpike program, it certainly has its limitations. We certainly will be looking at all reasonable approaches to pay for the advancement of the project.
Thank you. Just a
Further
follow-up.
question,
The other
Alderman Shaw?
is sort of a comment, but I like the fact that you are looking at a connection to Goffstown. I know that we represent Manchester, but I know that that area has long wished for some sort of access to 293 rather than coming all the way down through Manchester. So that would be, an excellent, and like you said, if it's going to get done, it probably should get done while you're doing it and get it over with. Thank you.
And I appreciate that, and I think there's no question Goffstown representatives also appreciate it. It is still a challenge. Through this corridor analysis, we're identifying that there is a reasonable approach for that connectivity. A lot is going to bear on the traffic modeling, because we really need to show that there's a traffic gain, a benefit to it. And so it's not out of the woods yet, but it's not being cut out of the reasonable approaches for this corridor. So we do envision it carrying forward into the next phase of the study.
Other questions? Alderman Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple, if I may. The project number 14048, that's a bridge between 6 and 7. That's sort of on hold until this gets figured out, because there's no chance in doing that until we figure we're going to be doing this. Then there's no need to do that, correct?
That is correct.
And on all these proposals, Exit 6 actually, proposals, we're not encroaching to the east on where the residential units are towards Stark Lane. We're not encroaching. If I remembered it, it's pushed more to the west.
Yes, right? As surprisingly, what we're seeing is that the easterly side of the corridor it is encroaching basically further to the west, so they actually have less impacts on the easterly side. What we're envisioning right now is the bulk of the movement would be more toward the westerly side. So it's, okay. But you're right, it does.
Right, so
right now, that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing.
And then, my goal is to be sure that Manchester is the most accessible. I do have concerns about, Goffstown and Hooksett, but my goal is to make sure that Manchester is accessible. Front Street, Dunbarton, coming to the east side, Elm Street. It looked like of all the proposals, it looked like the fourth one was, the first one, I'm sorry. The single point, the single point was the one that most fit that I mean, I don't know about all these lights, it's heavily traveled, you know, and I don't really see it getting any less traveled. I see it getting picked up. So, you know, once again, my main focus is making sure that Manchester is easily accessible. You know, so that'll be my focus. Now, on the funding, is there okay, on the funding, if the funding is there, I'm thinking that the gas fee, the gas tax addition is what the funding, is what this funding source is. We don't have another funding source today to do this.
At this point, we have not identified any further funding sources for the construction of a project here.
Okay.
Like I indicated earlier, we have not resulted in we still have the ability to apply for federal funds on the project.
Okay. So,
But I think, if I may,
Bill, if you could come up to the front, please.
Bill, no, we didn't, no, you could stay right.
I don't mean that's, but you said there isn't another funding source. The other funding source that we would most likely be looking
Bill,
at.
could you just for the record
Oh, I'm
identify
sorry.
your, thank you.
I'm Bill Cass, the Director of Project Development for the DOT. Alderman Long, when you mentioned that there wasn't another funding source, the other funding source that we'd be looking at primarily, because this is a turnpike, which is would be turnpike funds. Turnpike funds are supported by the tolls, and it's an enterprise self-supported system. So I think right now that would be, you know, and Representative Shaw, you had asked about, you know, federal funds. The federal funds are flat, they are stagnant, they are being stretched extremely thin. Most of the major work that we have going on in the system today is either turnpike funded, the turnpike capital projects, or supported by Garvey bonding, which we're doing on I-93. So major project like this, I think we would definitely be looking at supporting with the turnpike funds. So.
Okay, so if I follow up, I may. So the, what I'm not understanding, where is this on the, I mean, I remember looking at the 10-year plan, and this was at the top of the 10-year plan. I mean, is that still there?
All that's
Or
in the,
does this,
all that's in the 10-year plan right now is just, as Keith said, just this planning study. So future updates of the 10-year plan, future updates of the Turnpike Capital Program. We're going to be looking at the additional funding for this.
so, and what are we looking for funding, Bill? What is it, 55,000? How much was this?
That's an area that we have not put numbers on yet. That's, as we come out of this quarter analysis, we'll
Okay.
begin to get an understanding of the dollar values. Certainly, the level of improvements that we're looking at here is going to be very expensive, probably in excess of $75 million.
Okay. And when would we know that the funding was there?
I believe right now, you know, in the legislature, there's been a lot of discussion on the highway fund and the gas tax. My assumption is, you know, that we have a capital program on the Turnpike program that we need to address, and I presume we will take that up next session as well. We wanted to separate the two so we didn't overlap them and confuse them. So we're focusing on the highway fund this session. I think we're going to have to address the Turnpike fund next session.
Very good. Thank you.
Just on the update, if I recall, not too long ago, Public Works Director Shepard submitted a list of recommendations from the city, and I think this project was number one on the list from us as this DOT is going through the new 10-year plan. So that was submitted to DOT or the Regional Planning Commission, Kevin? It was submitted to the Regional Planning Commission on our behalf. Are there other questions?
I got one.
Alderman Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your comment to Alderman Long about the impact to the neighbors. When you showed us the stretch of road between the northbound on-ramp for exit 6 and the northbound off-ramp to exit 7, you said you may be widening that to 4 lanes?
Yes.
That was one of the plans.
If the interchange is, at exit 7 is left where it
Left
is,
where
and
it
we created a full interchange, because that's the comparative that we have to look at. Even though we understand that the interchange is so close together, it's going to require a wider system in order to handle that traffic. So that's the environmental balance. That's what the alternatives we have to look at. We have to look at that wider section, compare it to the moving the new interchange, creating a new interchange further north, how much decrease of impact that has. So that's an environmental comparison that will be done in the next phase.
And if we go with that plan, nothing says we're going to go with that plan, I would have to guess that the impact on the people on Stark Lane is going to be significant, because when you drive past Stark Lane now, you're looking in their front windows.
I would agree that any widening beyond even the 6-lane, 3 lanes each way, even that widening is certainly going to add an additional lane each side. Whether it's the westerly side or easterly, you add them, that's the analysis that we have to look at. But yes, those properties along Stark Lane, as long as the backside of Front Street, will have some.
And I just want to bring that point up, because when you were speaking before, you said that the impact would be to the west, but in that scenario, there'd be a significant impact to those people on Stark Lane, who, some of them have an issue now with the impact, so.
Yes, Alderman Roy, you are quite correct. My reference was more in the area of the exit 6
Okay.
interchange, because, to tell you the truth, looking at the concepts and the approaches for exit 6, I have been pleasantly pleased to see the how much real estate we can fit the improvements in, what we already own there. But you're right, north of exit 6, there's certainly going to be additional impacts.
Very good, thank you.
One side or the other, right?
One side or
Right,
the other.
there could be, right.
Yes.
Questions, further questions? Alderman Lavasser.
Thank you. This is just in a study phase?
Yes.
I thought that 10 years ago, we were supposed to be in line for exit 7. Did that get dropped out somewhere? Or does anybody have any institutional knowledge on that?
Yes, it was in the 10-year plan originally, and it wasn't funded through the Turnpike program, and so there weren't any funds to pursue that at the time.
So may I ask if, excuse me, so when there's a 10-year plan, the actual funding is for the actual conceptual design first? Is that how is that where we're going into now? This is a 10-year plan? I'm just kind of confused, like it wasn't funded for the first 10-year plan. Are we funded for the next 10-year plan, or?
Not yet. No,
Okay.
I had answered that, Representative Long. The only funding that is in place right now is to complete this conceptual study. When we go through our biennial update of the 10-year plan, these are the needs that we're going to have to address and prioritize.
So this concept that we have now, this was not something that was conceptualized 10 years ago or 15 years ago? This has been something that's been in the design process for the last year or so, or can you give me the history on that?
Do you want me to hit the history?
Go ahead.
Marty had a picture of a previous one up there. There was a previous concept, this one right here, that was developed when it was in the 10-year plan. This layout was developed at a very, very high level. There was no true engineering to it. We had a USGS map and some acetate overlays and just drew out where it may fit. That was the basis that programmed something in the 10-year plan. If you remember, about 4 to 6 years ago, we had a very overcommitted, a very unrealistic 10-year plan. So when we went through to get that plan under financial constraint, some of these ideas, some of these projects were the ones that were deferred from the 10-year plan. And we were only just now bringing them back on through these corridor studies and stuff, and trying to identify funding to bring them forward.
When you do these plans, the one that you're working on now, do you look at the amount of taking of property and what the effect on the tax rate would be in Manchester? In other words, if you were to come across Amoskeag Bridge and some of the properties on the left or the right were part of that taking, is there an impact on the study of what the tax effect would be if that property was taken and then not, like if you take $1 million worth of property, whatever that tax rate would be to us? Or do you put that into your plan?
That analysis is actually part of the environmental documentation for the project. It looks at the impacts of properties as well as the impact on the tax base as a result of it.
Is there a positive impact that's also on the other end of it? If there's a taking and there's a widening, is there other, I guess, tentacles that come off of that you see an increase in taxes or property development that you normally wouldn't get?
Right. Typically, through our environmental documentation, we look at the physical impact of the facility. There is an additional land use benefit that community could derive out of the improvements. With the impact itself, the ability to look at your land use development could increase and therefore over time have a positive gain for a community. I think we see this quite often if you look at 101 corridor between Manchester and the seacoast. Look at some of those interchanges over there and see the changes that occurred since those new interchanges came into place. So there is a land use benefit associated with the improvements. Just making the improvements, getting access through the interchange so that you have less delays and you feel safer. I mean, that itself brings in the potential for other developments within the area.
Have you looked at how this would tie in and affect Hackett Hill, which is our last major business development area on the map? Can you show us where that would be and how that would be affected?
At this phase, we have not looked at directly how the connectivity would be made there, but there's no question that the new interchange at Exit 7 has a benefit to the proposal of the development itself for Hackett Hill. We're running a very delicate balance here. We're looking at the safety and capacity for the turnpike. We're really trying to focus on it, but we do realize that this interchange will have other benefits besides addressing the safety and capacity that we're looking at.
Thank you.
If I just may, the concept earlier that showed the blue line, this concept, as Bill indicated, it is a rough concept. It was developed many years ago. I can tell you it was actually developed in the mid-'80s because I did it. I was the engineer working under Mike Dugas. Well, he wasn't the engineer at the time, but his previous predecessor. So I remember this, and it was just a topographic sheet and developing a profile and alignment and coming up with a rough idea of location for concept development for the 10-year plan. So I had a little history here.
If I may, really quickly, this one seems to have a little bit less of an impact on the direct land of the Hackett Hill. So your design at that time makes me happier than the one that I see now because it seems to kind of cross over into that property. And I only worry about that because I know they're trying to develop it. So at the time that they find some nice property to go on there, and then you guys are trying to develop and get the money and go through the whole legislative process, which I'm sure can be, I know what it's like. So you have to try to balance those two things going at the same time. And we have to kind of think about that if we're going to allow, I don't know what power or authority we have to allow anything to go up on that particular site, but members of this board will be here in a couple of years longer, et cetera. We'll have to keep this in mind if we're going to allow, I know they want to put a prison up there, et cetera. There's other issues that are going up there, but I like your other design because it seemed to have less impact on that particular site, but this is probably a more improved design for safety issues. So it's not an easy thing to do when you're trying to develop all of these things with really you don't really have the money in place to even do these things. So let me ask you, if we did develop that, then you would change your plan? Is that how it would work?
Change the plan.
Change the design?
We certainly would be through the process, the next phase of the project, as we look at identifying the corridor that is the least damaging practical alternative. We certainly would work with the city to make sure that from a long-term planning, it's.
No, I'm just saying, if precedent-wise, if you got approval on this, precedent-wise, and as far as I don't know what ordinances have to be passed or not, is it a race for the developer to get his property done before you guys get your ordinances passed at the state level? Or would it change upon that time frame?
Well, there's no question that if there's any change in land use through this corridor, it can have a bearing on the location and the alternatives that come forward.
All right.
The improvements through here will require acquisition of private property, as well as public property. And as a result, it will be a control of access, so it will be a special committee public hearing process. So we would follow the hearing process for the layout and seek executive approval through the special committee. But yes, certainly development that occurs between now and the time we go to the public hearing will have a bearing on the final layout of the roadway.
And I would just add, I think, you know, it's going to be a long process, but I think our goal, first and foremost, would be to make sure that things are done in concert with the city's plans, with whatever development comes up. It's got to be supported. It sounded, you phrased it a little adversarial, but, you know, I don't think, you know, our goal would be to make anything that's proposed here, and I think all of our goal, make it work so that it is engineeringly feasible, it's permittable, and it you know, works in harmony with the land use plans and the development plans up that are planned up there. So I don't think it would be, you know, what came first. We would certainly look to coordinate to make sure that it worked with whatever development plans came along.
Alderman Roy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question on that same subject now that it's been brought up. One of the issues we had 10 years ago was access to our property on Hackett Hill. That's what was, we didn't have any access, so that had an adverse effect on our ability to develop that. When I look at this new plan, as opposed to that blue line, it seems to me that this would be more advantageous to us to develop that property because it gives us direct access to it than having it all to the east of the power lines. And then we'd have to go through getting access underneath those power lines and everything else. Am I wrong at looking at it that way, or? This would, I mean, and it's like 3 phases up in there, so it certainly isn't going to, this is like up around phase 2 or 3, I think, but wouldn't this be more advantageous to us to have access to that land and to develop it than the original blue line that was hugging the landfill?
If I could answer it this way, actually, I mean, we have the copies of the master plan. In fact, at VHB, we prepared the original master plan. This layout, as shown, doesn't preclude the development of that. And for all I know, you may be actually right, it may benefit. But we've laid this out to make sure that we do not preclude that development or access to it.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? I'll take a few. I think, you know, for speaking for myself, I'm not sure in my time here that there's been a project that could be more important to the city of Manchester and its impact on many wards. I mean, Alderman Shaw talked about the improvement sections 1 and 2 of 293. But when you look at this, there's direct impacts on Ward 12 and parts of 11, and as Mr. Kennedy said, if they didn't do that, I'll call it the Dunkin' Donuts ramp, you know, there was going to be a lot of traffic impacts down to Ward 10 and Granite Street. Then when you come across the bridge, although it's not part of their project, there are directly impacts on Ward 3 and parts of Ward 1 and Ward 2. So this is a very important project to the city of Manchester, directly and indirectly. Keith, this is either for you or Marty on some of these questions. I do agree with, I think it was Alderman Long that said, maybe it was Alderman Roy that said the first, the single point urban interchange looked like maybe it was the best option. and having been to a few of the previous meetings, been a lot of work by you folks. You had a lot of options out there at one point, and you've kind of narrowed this down. Access to Front Street from Goffstown Road or Ramsgate Bridge, can you just kind of point out how would you get to Front Street from either of those locations?
Yeah, in fact, if you're coming down Goffstown Road and you wanted to, today you could take a left at a signal, you would not be able to do that. What you would do is from Goffstown Road, you would come up, cross over to the signal, and underneath onto Front Street. And by the way, while I think of it, if I could just add one thought while I was saying that, is that we've showed this little ramp here. One additional consideration we're giving at this point is that for traffic under this concept, traffic that would be coming from Front Street and would like to go to Goffstown Road, it would have to come down to this signal, take a left at this signal, and head in that direction. Or traffic that wants to head southbound on 293 would have to come down to this and then get on that ramp at this point. What we're also thinking about is if we end up moving forward with this concept, we could do a little bit more here and actually allow that left turn from Front Street onto the ramp here, which would make it a little easier. So that's another consideration we can.
Okay. And Marty, Amoskeag Bridge would be, if you're coming from the east and you were heading westerly on the Amoskeag Bridge, you wanted to get to Front Street?
You would come down to the signal here, take a left-hand turn, right, and underneath to Front Street.
Okay, very good. And one of the changes that I just mentioned is I call it the Dunkin' Donuts ramp. That early on was something you were thinking you might have to get rid of, but I appreciate looking at it and the impact it would have in other parts of the city. In one of your previous presentations, I know the mayor kind of got on you a little bit about, I want to say I don't know if midterm was the correct, where midterm improvements, where are you with that? Are they still possibilities, or where are you with that?
We're going to identify that there's the potential for these midterm alternatives. Ultimately, what this comes down to is when you move forward with the project, it's going to come down to how many dollars are available. If it takes a while to do these longer, to get the long-term fix in place, it's conceivable that you may want to spend some money to address a safety issue in the near term. Again, the mayor's point was, well, be careful. If you do that, we'll never see anybody again. So, I mean, that's a consideration.
Yeah, midterm may become long-term, I think is what he said.
But again, we'll talk about those issues.
And Marty, could you just talk about what some of those could be? I don't know if you have a slide on it or not.
Yeah, I think actually I do. I believe I threw in a couple here. I did. Basically, what we were looking at was to address this weave. Today, you have this heavy traffic coming on here and traffic exiting here. Well, before reconstructing the entire interchange, what if you were to construct a ramp that came in here, so you take that off ramp, move it over here, and then take this on ramp and bring it down at this point. Then you would close that, and you would basically eliminate that weave. That would be a safer condition. By the way, that costs money. That's not a low, you're talking about a fairly significant improvement. We also talked about, well, if you do that, there's a relatively heavy volume of traffic entering at this point, so we were bringing them down to a traffic signal. So we said, well, maybe there's a better way to do that. You don't want that heavy volume stopping at the signal, so you have this intersection where you bring the ramp traffic off at a signal to take a left or a right on Eddy Road, but to allow the on-ramp traffic to come off, get on a ramp and actually go over and onto the highway in that fashion. And then we also looked at one other potential and said, well, if we're doing that, if we're taking that traffic on and that traffic on, maybe what we could be doing is, again, bring a ramp off into an intersection, but allow the traffic that's now coming on that ramp to come down Eddy Road, come to this intersection, and simply getting on a loop. So it's there's different types of ways of looking at it. Again, those again, millions of dollars worth of, construction, but they could be a kind of a short-term fix to a safety problem.
Well, I think you're going to see Alderman Long and Alderman Shaw become champions and out leading the funding efforts on this. If we could go, a few questions for me on Exit 7. If you could, you talked about two different potential opportunities for the northbound, the relocated Exit 7 coming back down to Front Street. And I was just curious, what was the advantage or disadvantage with each?
Actually, where we are right now, the primary difference would be the impact to properties at the college. And so at this point, you know, now that we've got this developed, we're going to want to sit down with the college, see what they're actually developing a master plan for that area. And so it will likely come down to which has the least impact of properties here.
There's no real impact from a traffic standpoint at the intersection of Front Street?
They both work.
They both work
acceptably.
And cost-wise, they're about the same?
They'd be similar.
Okay. You know, you brought up the connection to Goffstown Road, and I don't know if the Goffstown's represented here by Public Works Director Quorum this evening. You know, we've had to put some traffic restrictions on Goffstown Road to prevent trucking and that, so we try to be good neighbors to them, and hopefully there are some opportunities here to get some of that traffic moving through Exit 7, and maybe it'll even relieve some of the traffic at Exit 6, and appreciate Alderman Lavassa was asking questions about Hackett Hill, which I had written down as well, and I know that's really not part of your scope, but I appreciate that you're looking at it, and I'm just curious, it made me write down a note, how far off, Keith, off the turnpike itself is the responsibility, and I guess if we use that's a good, very appropriate slide, do you expect will be the responsibility of New Hampshire DOT? Do we expect if this was done that part of the project might be taking it as far up as, is that Dunbar? No, it's beyond Dunbar Road there, but.
It's a very good question. I can tell you right now, I don't have an answer for it.
Okay.
But we certainly, as part of the focus of the project itself, we're looking at, again, the safety and capacity for turnpike improvements. We certainly recognize there's a connectivity back to Front Street. We recognize that there's a connectivity to someplace to the west. And as I indicated, the corridor analysis we're doing now is kind of a top-level traffic modeling to get an understanding as to if this connectivity is not made here, what would be the traffic load onto this interchange, as well as down at Exit 6, what non-relief would occur as a result. So with this connectivity in here, is there a benefit being derived down here that could benefit from this connector, as well as support the environmental impact that would cause? The difficulty that we're going to have, and when I say we, I'm saying we as overall team and community, is to find the supportive reasons to meet that national environmental protection requirements. So we have some very stringent rules we have to touch to answer, and we're still working toward that. We do not see that connectivity being excluded as part of this corridor analysis. We do see it being included so that we'll carry it forward into the next environmental phase of the project. But that's a very good question, and hopefully you can bring it up in about a year from now.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Lavassa?
Yes, thank you. I didn't think that I could ever find anything more exciting than watching a Manchester school board meeting, but this is I'm serious, this is really a lot more exciting than I thought it was going to be honest with you guys, because now I'm seeing all this you know, right here. I have to give you credit, Alderman. I didn't really look forward to this meeting, but I'm glad I showed up, because, you know, you're talking about some pretty dry stuff, but, you know, I don't claim to be an engineer of any sort, but I did have a paper route for 6 years, and If anything, you learn how to try to get every shortcut you can and every fence you can jump over, every brook, the fastest you can get your papers delivered, the faster you can get home to watch Gilligan's Island. So I find this stuff to be exciting. But what I would say is, if we had if I was in charge of this project, to me, this right here would be more important than dealing with the Muskeg Bridge issue. And my perspective would be that if you could, our major issue with going around that Muskeg Bridge is everybody has to get to Goffstown. If you could give them an alternative route, those people coming home from Concord could go that way. People who are coming up 93 could also maybe take that way, which would relieve a lot of pressure down here. Also, what you would be doing for us in Manchester is developing one of our really last important pieces of economically developed land. We've traded UNH for that property, I think back in 1999 or so, 98, with the expectation that that would bring us a lot of taxpayer money from the development that would go there. But I look at that as from two perspectives. It looks to me like if you could get that in, it would really relieve a lot of pressure right on the Muskeg Circle. If you could get that bypass over to Goffstown, they'd have an alternative route which would, help them and help us. But also at the same time, you could really do a heck of a good job by allowing a lot more companies that may want to, take those properties, but because they have to go Front Street to get there. Because there really is, it's a really tough, I don't know how many times you've driven on that road, but, growing up here, living here, and living in that area and trying to drive on that road, I'm amazed anybody would even want to live on that street, to be honest with you. But the whole idea that we took that property was that this was already going to be done. There was a point where we had a lot of bondable money that I suggested that we bonded ourselves because I think it's that important. And that never occurred, but what's the possibility of getting through the legislative process to actually get this started, and what kind of time frame are we looking at? Because it's something we thought would already have been done by now.
Before I let Keith, just recall when he opened up, the state started, New Hampshire DOT started this process because of safety and volume. I don't know if volume was the specific word Keith used, but that's how they started this. Economic development is part of this, but they were focusing on safety and capacity on the interchange. So I'd let Keith answer your question then.
So to make sure I'm clear, that design was made to decrease the volume on Muskeg, on the circle?
This quarter analysis for Exit 7, any improvements that we look to make at Exit 6 with the close proximity of the interchange at Exit 7, we could not look at it as two separate approaches. Okay. We had to look at them. We have to look at them together to see how they are functioning within each other. As Marty indicated, having the interchange at the existing location of Exit 7, what gains does that location have for benefits at Exit 6? That's that traffic modeling I talked about. And is there a better gain if there was a new interchange with the connectivity to the west at some point, whether it's Dunbarton Road or Goffstown Road? There's a traffic benefit associated with either of those connectivities, connections. So from a traffic modeling, that's where we are right now. We're evaluating those alternatives to try to establish what we see as a reasonable gain for reduction of traffic in this location, Exit 6, as a result of this benefit over here. Okay?
I understand the mayor said, well, I want to go for the whole kit and caboodle. Yeah. And I'd like to get something. I mean, I'm not one of these guys who believes that we're just going to automatically, you saw what you have to go through to get a tax pass in the state. You see what people want to get rid of toll booths. See that people don't want to go up in the gas tax. We have the federal issues. We have sequestration. I look at, I'm not very optimistic that the money's just going to show up somewhere. So if you had, in your professional opinion as engineers, if you were to do one of the two projects, I know which one I would choose, sitting here in my seat as a Manchester resident with the thought process that I want to gain some economic value as quickly as I can, so that'll bring more money in, so we can do more to help our schools, et cetera, lower the tax rate for our property developers. Which project would you say is more important if you could only get one of them? I mean, eventually you're going to get two, but that could be 50 years down the road. If you could get one, which one would be more important? I guess you're going to be looking at two different perspectives. My perspective, if you were to look at my perspective, you'd say, yeah, I can understand Alderman Lavasser, that's the one you'd want. But I guess I have to defer to your expert opinion, because you guys are more, you know, I don't know if you've ever owned a paper route. You probably understand.
I don't know, is that a fair question for Mr. Cota to have to answer, though?
Well, I mean, they're going to have to go and get the money. I mean, do you have to ask for the whole thing at one time?
Alderman Lavasser, it's really difficult at this point to say that there's a special benefit with one versus the other. What we have seen so far is that they both interchange improvements are necessary in order to meet the purpose of the project, the capacity and safety. Because certainly Exit 7 has its issues, but Amoskeag Circle has even greater capacity and safety issues. So if you look at it from purely a factor of accident history, then one would look at it and say, I really need to put my eggs in the basket for Exit 6. But I know that if I put my eggs in the basket for Exit 6, assuming that the single point diamond is the alternative, I'm going to have a lot of impacts in between Exit 7 and Exit 6 to deal with. I still have that weave connectivity to make. So I got those problems there. So that's why I'm looking at, in conjunction, I think the answer is both improvements.
Can you do both at the same time? Because, I mean, think about the amount of traffic that we already have, and if you're doing construction on Amoskeag Bridge and you're doing the other one at the same time, I can't imagine, that would be more of a nightmare to deal with. So wouldn't you do one before the other?
In this size of a project, we would certainly look at where the reasonable construction projects can occur to result in the least environment or least traffic damage to the traffic flow. That would be the next phase after the NEPA process. We basically will go through the environmental process, get approvals that this is the location that we can environmentally get permits for, and that we have funding for. And then under the final design phase of the project, we would actually start laying the roadway out, looking at the minimum right-of-way that we need to purchase to build the project, going through that process, getting our permits, and then looking at constructivity aspects of how do we build this. I can guarantee you there's going to be some traffic disruptions at the Amoskeag Circle.
How much is the cost for both at the same time going?
We don't have the actual price yet. As I quoted earlier, I certainly envision that the cost of the overall improvements will probably exceed $75 million.
Oh,
now, it certainly means that there may be a series of, ultimately, if we're able to bring this to fruition, there may be a series of 3 projects, 3 contracts, possibly 4 contracts. I can't tell you right now, but I can tell you that engineering challenge, I'm up for it.
All right, before we wrap this up, any other questions? I just want to recognize our departments and who are here. David Beauchene from Planning and Community Development is represented. Kevin Shepard and our new city engineer, Todd Connors, are here from Public Works. Guy Chabot and Dave Paris from Manchester Waterworks. Dave LaFerrier from the Transit Authority. Jim Flanagan was here from the Police Department. Julie Chen from Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. And the representatives from the town of Goffstown out in the back taking all kinds of notes. So, Keith, is there anything we as a city need to get you, or are you getting all the information you need from any and all departments? I know David's been active on your committee, and Bruce Thomas from Public Works as well.
At this point, no. We certainly deeply appreciate the efforts of the city and the staff has provided to us. You have been really a great community to work with. We all know that we look at this as a team approach, and we will continue to look at it that way.
And on behalf of Mayor Gatsis, the Board of Aldermen, our citizens, I want to thank you, Keith, Mike, and Bill from New Hampshire DOT for being here this evening, and Marty from VHB for being here as well. Very, very informative, and I think, as Alderman Lasser said, many might have come here thinking it was going to be a pretty dry presentation, but it's a very exciting project, and I know we look forward to it going forward. So thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. This being a special meeting of the board, no further business can be presented. Is there a motion to adjourn? Alderman Roy by Alderman Craig. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, folks.